tax, with every penny going to our schools. We need a tax system that works for our seniors and our children. That's why I'm running for governor.
Now the New Hampshire governor's debate. It's courtesy of Manchester's WMUR-TV.
The Granite State Debates, brought to you by the Union Leader, New Hampshire's newspaper, and WMUR-TV. And now, live from the WMUR-TV studios, the New Hampshire Gubernatorial Debate.
Good evening and welcome to our WMUR studios, where we, along with the Union Leader, are proud to present to you the third in the general election series of our Granite State Debates. Tonight we bring you the candidates for governor. They are John Babiarz, a Libertarian from Grafton, Craig Benson, a Republican from Rye, and State Senator Mark Fernald, a Democrat from Sharon. For the next hour, a panel of journalists who cover New Hampshire politics will ask questions of the candidates. They are Tom Fahey, State House Bureau Chief for the Union Leader, my colleague and WMUR-TV Political Director, Scott Spradling, and Trish Anderton of New Hampshire Public Radio. The format of tonight's debate will work this way. A panelist will ask a question of one candidate. That candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Then the other candidates will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. A panelist will then ask the candidate who had the rebuttal a question. He will have 1 minute to respond, and the other candidate will have 30 seconds for a rebuttal as well. We anticipate 5 rounds of questions from our panelists. We will also allow some time for the candidates to pose questions of one another. Each will have 60 seconds to respond to his opponent's question. There will be time for closing statements at the end of the hour. The candidates have all been briefed on the rules. A draw has determined that John Babiarz would get the first question. That question will come from Tom Fahey.
Thanks. Hi, Mr. Babiarz. For those who are unfamiliar with Libertarian Party ideas, would you explain what sort of a 2-year budget you would craft if elected governor, what departments you consider to be essential and those that you think ought to be phased out?
I believe that public safety is important and, in fact, a constitutional requirement. That would stay. However, I believe that the Airport Commission is obsolete because the federal government is in charge of airports. I also believe that the various branches need to be re-engineered because it's long time past that they need to be reviewed. For example, we have a lottery commission that I believe could be more efficient, and also the liquor commission. Most importantly, I've met with people in DCYF and private contractors that work with DCYF, and they tell me that the bureaucracy is killing them, that they need to be streamlined. And so what I'm looking for is making government more efficient to provide the services that are necessary for the people of New Hampshire. And furthermore, we can do it cost effectively by taking a look, by re-engineering, by putting new technology in place. So my budget would be less than what is currently there after we do our restructuring.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, 30 seconds.
In the state of New Hampshire, we do use some obsolete processes to get things done. My budget is actually based on being more efficient and effective in dealing with things, keeping the budget at 3% or less, and also capturing savings. We still use carbon paper forms in the state of New Hampshire. I think it's time we move to newer technologies. If we can make our government more efficient and effective, we can save money and deliver better services to the citizens of this state, and that's what I would like to do.
Thank you. Senator Fernald.
We are a frugal people. I learned frugality growing up here in New Hampshire. I cut my own firewood, we drive our cars into the ground, we shop for bargains. I'm going to be just as careful with your money as I am with my own. We need a government that is frugal, but not cheap. We have people in our state government who are still using DOS-based computers because the Republican legislature has been too cheap to allow us to invest in the very technology that can make us more efficient and productive as a state.
Another question, Scott Spradling now to Mr. Benson.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Over the last 3 budget cycles, business taxes have steadily and quickly climbed in order to balance our state's budget. Can you promise here tonight that you will veto any proposed business tax hikes?
We put a real strain on businesses throughout the state, especially when the economy's soft. And I would veto any new business taxes that would raise the burden on our current in-state businesses. I think it's important that we send a message to those businesses that we value their business in the state and we don't tax them out of the state. That would also include vetoing an income or a sales tax, because I believe that those are hidden taxes on our businesses in the state, especially small businesses where the cost of income tax is borne by those small businessmen.
Senator Fernald, 30 seconds.
I would veto any increase in business taxes, but I'll go you one better. I would repeal the business enterprise tax. It's an unfair tax that taxes businesses even if they lose money. Mr. Benson would keep that tax. In fact, he was one of the chief instigators of that tax a decade ago. My plan also cuts property taxes paid by businesses by 23%. Right now, they, along with everybody else, are paying the highest property taxes in the country.
Mr. Babiarz, 30 seconds.
I would veto any increases to the business enterprise tax or business profit tax. Too long we've taken businesses and made them the brunt of any increases because they don't vote. It's easier. That's wrong. It's businesses that provide the jobs and economic opportunity in our state. And that is why I would veto that.
Back to our journalist, Trish Anderton, with a question for Senator Fernald.
Thanks. Welcome, Senator. Critics of your education funding plan say once the state has an income tax, it's only going to go higher and higher. You've promised to pass a constitutional amendment which requires a supermajority vote to hike the income tax, but that wouldn't happen until 2004, if then. So what's to keep your income tax rate from soaring?
I'm not going to pass an income tax by my desk unless it's all dedicated to education. I'm not going to support an income tax unless it repeals the business enterprise tax, because that is an income tax now. I propose a constitutional amendment that every penny be dedicated to education. This isn't a new idea. We amended our Constitution about a decade ago to dedicate every penny of lottery to education, and it's worked. We've dedicated gas tax to the roads. We can do the same thing with education. I also propose we amend our Constitution to require that any increase be approved by referendum, by the people. So if there's going to be any future change, they get the final say. Ultimately, this is up to the people if they're going to accept these constitutional amendments. But I've traveled all over this state, and this is a plan that people support. They know we have an education funding problem. They want the income tax to be dedicated to that solution, and they will support it.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Babiarz, 30 seconds.
Mark is counting on an income tax that eventually, hopefully, that they'll have these constitutional amendments to safeguard it. First of all, the nearest time that the safeguards could be put into place if people vote for a constitutional amendment in 2004. That's provided that the bill comes out of the House and Senate by that time period. I don't think he can guarantee that. Look at the problems we had during the past legislative session just to get any bills out. I think we have to worry about politicians making promises, what the legislative body is going to do.
Mr. Benson?
41 other states have created an income tax to lower property tax, and it hasn't happened yet. In fact, the last 9 states to pass an income tax have seen those rates rise dramatically. And even Mark, who ran last time, ran on a 3.5% income tax, which is now 4%. It's tough to keep an income tax small, and all it does is put an extra burden on the people in New Hampshire. We don't need that.
Next round of questions from our journalist, Scott Spradling, with the next question for John Babiarz.
Thanks, Jen. Mr. Babiarz, commuters in Merrimack feel they are unfairly taxed by the toll booths located on the Everett Turnpike in their town. Do you support getting rid of those toll booths, and would you even raise taxes to do it?
First of all, those tolls may be put there because of bonding issues. But if we could do that, I would favor removing the tolls in the Merrimack and putting it into the, having that raised through the gasoline tax. Because that way, we don't have people stopping at toll booths wasting fuel and polluting our environment. So I would prefer to have that cost covered in the gasoline tax.
Thank you. Mr. Benson?
I would like to see all the tolls removed from the highways in New Hampshire, and I'd like to see more commuter rails put in place so that we can get our people from place to place without crowding our highways. We need to find a way to be able to do that and make sure that the people in the state of New Hampshire have good roads, but also other good means of access to get from place to place throughout this state.
Senator, your 30 seconds.
Getting rid of tolls sounds like a good idea. Keep in mind, a lot of those tolls are paid by out-of-staters. If we get rid of the tolls, we've got to increase the gas tax 4 or 5 cents a gallon, and that will be paid mostly by us. 2 good solutions maybe to the toll problem is to eliminate the toll booths on the Merrimack exits, so the New Hampshire people getting off the highway don't have to pay, but the out-of-staters going through do have to pay. Another good idea is to put in the Easy Pass for our toll booths so that we don't have these huge backups at the tolls that we have now.
Back to our journalist, another question. Trish Anderton to Mr. Benson.
Mr. Benson, do you think it should be easier for schools to get rid of bad teachers?
I think accountability is needed in all our schools. And what I want to do under my education plan is two things. One, I want to give 179 days of the year back to teachers to teach the way they want. We've got a huge bureaucracy problem in our schools whereby our teachers are told how to teach, and they don't teach with the passion that they would normally teach with if they did it their way. It's time to put that back. We also need to have a way in which we can measure the progress of these teachers, and I propose two ways. One, we measure the understanding of a student from 0 to 100%, a more traditional way. And two, the progress a student made from the year before to this current year. In the case of a student scoring in the 20 percentile range, say in the 4th grade, and moving to the 60th percentile range in the 5th grade, they've made great progress. And even though they score average, that teacher did a terrific job.
Senator, your 30-second response.
Let me try to be the first one to answer the question about teacher tenure and teacher non-renewal. I believe that we should hold everybody to standards. And if they don't meet standards, then they're not going to continue in that position. Our state law for teacher non-renewal is too cumbersome, and I have supported efforts to streamline the process at the State Board of Education level so that school districts are not facing a huge expense for appeals to the state level if they do need to get rid of a teacher who is not living up to standards.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Babiarz.
I support the ability for the school district to decide when the teachers need to be removed. It is sad that parents have to put up with some teachers that may not be competent. And that's why I also believe in school choice and tuition tax credit, so that parents can have a choice. If the school is not taking the responsibility and the action it needs to correct the situation, that parents can move to another school, whether it's homeschool, private school, or another public school. And that's the kind of safeguards I'm looking for.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Tom Fahey for Senator Fernald.
Yes, hi, Senator. So, tourism is a major industry in this state, especially in the northern half of the state. Would you continue the increased funding that the state now has for tourism development and the increased level of LCHIP, which is meant to preserve the natural and historic sites around the state that tourists come to see?
Thank you. I do support the tourism promotion efforts the state is making. We increased the funding this year with a great deal of thought. We get a lot of revenue from the room and meals tax on restaurants and hotels. And what we believe, and I think this is being borne out, is that if we promote New Hampshire as a tourism destination, then we're going to have more tourists, we're going to come and spend their money, and we're going to collect tax revenues far in excess of the money that we're investing in the promotion. So I think that that should continue as part of our state budget. I should point out that we're facing a $100 million deficit next year, and unless we solve the problem, funding for good programs like this are going to be in jeopardy. Now, as for the LCHIP program, it is a wonderful idea, Land and Community Heritage Investment Program. We can use matching funds from the state to protect critical lands and historic structures. We were recommended that we fully fund that program at $12 million a year. We only did half that much. I support full funding, but Mr. Benson does not, and that's a very big difference between us on the environmental issues.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Babiarz?
For every dollar that we raise, or every dollar we invest, we raise $8 from the tourism industry. I support increasing that amount because it brings back more money to the state. Further, this state has some wonderful places, properties, if you will, and that's why I believe in current use, which is part of our Constitution. However, LCHIP conflicts with the Constitution, and I'm looking for possibly having a constitutional amendment so that LCHIP can be properly justified. Currently in the Constitution, I fear that there may be a conflict.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, 30 seconds.
Tourism is a great industry in this state, and we need to invest in an industry that allows us to get such a great return back. Some people say as high as $9 for every dollar we invest. If we continue to do that, we'll build our tourism industry, and I'm in favor of that. I am in favor of LCHIP, and I'd like to see it expanded using private dollars as well as public dollars. I think by doing that, we can preserve a lot more land. I will mention Mark missed the vote on creating LCHIP when he was a senator. So when he talks about my cutting it, it's wrong.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. We now begin the portion of tonight's debate where the candidates will ask questions of one another. Each will have 30 seconds to ask a question to both of the other candidates. The response time is 60 seconds. Mr. Babiarz will ask the first question of the other two candidates, and Mr. Benson, you will get the first response.
Greg, in politics, it's a dangerous sport. People pick on you, media goes and harasses you, other political parties try to stab you in the back and undermine you at every instance. Why, as a CEO, that you now decide, why are you running for governor?
Thank you for the question. The reason I'm running for governor is because I've been very successful in this state. I've been able to find a company in a garage and grow it to 7,000 people. It really is the New Hampshire American dream. We hired shoe mill employees and insurance people and used car salesmen to work in a high-tech company. It worked out great. I think that New Hampshire difference, that advantage, is something that we ought to preserve for our children. I see it under jeopardy right now. Whether it's from higher taxes, bigger bureaucracy, or the fact that New Hampshire doesn't pay attention to the businesses that are in this state, it's time we stood up and fought for that New Hampshire advantage and difference and allow the people of this state to pass that same gift on to their children and grandchildren. That's just what I would like to do.
Senator Fernald, you have 1 minute to respond.
My parents taught me the importance of community service. I learned from them by example. And when I began my adult life, I started serving the community as well on local boards and my church council and in other ways. But I'll tell you, there was an earthquake in New Hampshire on December 17, 1997. You may not remember, but it knocked me out of bed. It was the Claremont decision. The Supreme Court said, we have some basic principles at stake here in this state. We have to educate our children, and we have to pay for it in a way that's fair. And the property tax is not fair. So I've worked to fix that. Now, after I got woken up by that decision, I went back to sleep. I thought, this is too hard. I have my own job. I got a family to support. I can't afford to go to Concord for $100 a year. But a voice kept telling me, this is your time to serve your community. And so I've spent 4 years fighting for better schools and for lower property taxes to help the people of New Hampshire and to stand up for the principles, the founding principles of this state that make it a great place.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Benson, you may now ask a question of the other two candidates, and Senator Fernald, you will have first response.
Mark, we disagree on a number of issues, and that's fine. On income tax, we disagree. But on one issue, I need to ask you why you did what you did. You voted 6 months after September 11th not to allow schools to allow children to pledge allegiance to the flag. I'd like to ask you about that.
Our Constitution allows people the right of conscience. I support the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think it is very important that our children learn the Pledge of Allegiance. But there was a problem with that vote because it also included language that was going to require our schools to have the ability to set aside time to say the Lord's Prayer. And I said to myself, my children say the Lord's Prayer on Sunday morning. They say the Pledge of Allegiance on Monday morning. And we've got a flaw here because this is the way it should be, separation of church and state. That is what our Constitution requires. And this bill did not do that. It was an unconstitutional vote I was being asked to make. And I'm not going to trample on the basic principles of this country and of this state. So it was a difficult vote. But above all, we have to be true to our principles and true to the Constitution. That's why I made that vote. And I would like to think, Craig, that if you were there that day, you would have voted the same way. You would have voted for the Constitution.
Mr. Babiarz, you have 1 minute.
Government always puts mandates on the school level, whether it's the Pledge of Allegiance, prayers, or some other program. In a truly free education system, parents will make the decision what's in their school. That's the problem with having a school system that's dictated by a central board of education that has influence from the legislative branch. And that is why I believe in school choice. Let the parents decide what's in their school, whether it's prayer, whether it's pledging to allegiance, whether environmentalism is taught, or scientific knowledge, or trades. But that's why I believe in school choice. And mandates from the state should not interfere in local control of education.
Senator Fernald, you have the next question of the other two candidates, and Mr. Babiarz, you will get the first response.
John, about 8 years ago, an elderly widow who I represented came to me with something that really touched my heart. She said, my property taxes have gone up again, and my income's gone down because one of my investments went into bankruptcy. I had to cut my pledge to the church. Her property taxes, our tax system, caused her great pain. And I said, we've got to change this property tax system. Why don't you want to cut property taxes in half the way I do?
Why, Mark, I want to cut property taxes, but what I've seen with the statewide property tax is that we now have the concept of donor towns. And donor towns hurt the elderly in that town. Prior to the statewide property tax, local towns could have exemptions to care for the elderly or the veterans. Now we have a statewide system that hurts even farmers, people in those donor towns that can't afford it. So when we have a tax system that is put into place because we hurried, we panicked because of something the court said, that is wrong. And that's why I want to repeal the statewide property tax, so that we can have local control and local exemptions, so that people in their own community can watch what's going on and hold local officials accountable. When money gets to Concord, it's hard to hold people accountable. It looks like a big magic pot of money. I think we need to stop sending money to the state to be redistributed.
Mr. Benson, 1 minute.
Under my plan, I would cap property tax for seniors to a percentage of their income. 6, 8, or 10% would allow them to stay in their homes for as long as they want to, and we wouldn't push them out. I have to say, creating an income tax to be able to lower people's tax is not logic that I follow. Even Jean Shaheen is running a commercial right now that's talking about New Hampshire having the lowest tax burden in the entire country. And she does not support an income tax either, as a Democrat. So what I think we don't need to do is create a new system by which we pay more to state government and allow the people of the state to keep their money and do what they need to do to make their families successful, their businesses successful, and as a result, the state of New Hampshire successful.
And with that, we begin another round of questions from our journalist, Trish Anderton, with a question from Mr. Babiarz.
Mr. Babiarz, groundwater has become a major issue in the state with the dispute over the USA Springs plan to bottle water in Nottingham. Residents tried to stop it, but recently a court ruled that the state has final say. How much control do you think communities should have over water?
I think communities should have a lot of control over water. In fact, water is our most precious asset. Yet, 2 years ago, when I called for getting rid of MTBE out of our water, using states' rights to tell the federal government no more MTBE, that hasn't happened. The current administration is looking for government to give them a waiver or permission. Water's too precious for that. And as far as pumping out a lot of water, well, first of all, each water table has an aquifer that has to have a recharge area. Pumping more than what can accumulate through natural rainfall or natural traversal of the groundwaters is wrong. And I think local control is crucial for that, because they know what's going on in the local community. And to have the state override local control, to me, is wrong.
Mr. Benson, your 30-second response.
MTBE is a big problem for our wells. We need to address that as quickly as possible. With the growth in New Hampshire, we also need to understand the water needs of the state. And RSA 485, which allows the state to make these decisions about groundwater, does not allow for local input as part of that rule. I think we need to change that and allow local people to have input into the decisions that affect them directly.
Senator Fernald.
I believe that the waters of the state, as we call them in the statute books, are indeed the waters of the state, and that we need to have regulations in place to make sure that big corporations don't come in and carry off millions of gallons a day to sell them to Europe. I supported Senate Bill 410 that would have given the state and local governments power to regulate these huge groundwater withdrawals. We were lucky to get a bipartisan vote out of the Senate, but I must tell you the Republican leadership of the House killed this regulation, and we still have no regulations on the books to protect us from this.
Thank you, sir. New question, Tom Fahey with a question for Mr. Benson.
Thanks. Since you've been running over the past 18 months or more, you've referred often to the clean sheet of paper approach to drawing up a budget, to the efficiencies that you would find there, zero-based budgeting. After all these months of talking about state government, can you name at least one specific government program that you would target for a cut?
Well, Tom, that's a great question. I have talked about the clean sheet of paper because I think what we did in the past doesn't matter anymore. It's time to move forward. And one of the things that I think we've got to understand is there's a number of different departments in the state of New Hampshire that are redundant to one another when it comes to delivering some services. For instance, Environmental Services just put in a bill that allows them to inspect docks, even though the Department of Safety has people that already go on the lakes with boats and people that do almost that exact same function. Now, I understand Department of Environmental Services has people of different skills, but I train shoe mill workers to be high-tech workers. I certainly think we can expect Department of Safety people to inspect docks. That type of redundancy needs to get out of the state of New Hampshire, otherwise we can't set our priorities and get things done.
Senator.
I'm sorry, the clean sheet of paper. I think what I'd like to say is this. If we started this state with a clean sheet of paper, would we choose a statewide property tax and donor towns and the highest property tax burden in the country? Would we choose a business enterprise tax that no other state has? Would we choose to tax seniors out of their homes? I say no. Mr. Benson says yes. He would keep all of those things. I believe it's time for change, but we're only going to get that change if we elect people who haven't taken a pledge against everything except what we're doing now.
Mr. Babiarz, your 30 seconds.
I was a member of a school budget committee, and when the committee was first formed, we based everything zero budget, year after year, so we can justify what programs work, what didn't work. Prior to that, we had a program called Reading Initiative. Is it still initiative if it reoccurs? That's why we took a look at all those things, make sure the programs work, and what's needed is funded, and new innovations are funded also. But when a program has not been justified and not been accounted for, we should eliminate them.
Thank you. Next question from our journalist, Scott Spradling, with a question for Senator Fernald.
Thanks, Jen. Senator, I'd like to take you through a hypothetical. We're 6 months down the line from right now. You fought the hard fight on your income tax plan, and it has failed. Given that the budget debate is not over yet, I'm wondering what your plan B is should the income tax fail to make it through the legislature next year.
My goals are balance the state budget, cut property taxes in half, restore funding to social programs that were cut last year so that we have disabled people on waiting lists. We need to achieve those goals, and I'm going to work with the legislature to do that. We have 425 people in this state who are charged with meeting the goals of the people. This isn't just about me, it's about the other 424, and we have to work together to achieve those goals. If they can find another way to achieve the goals, other than what I'm proposing, I will be all for it. I haven't heard anybody suggest it yet, a way to achieve those goals. But I'm all ears. Anybody who's seen me work in the Senate know that I ask a lot of questions and I'm willing to listen to all sides before I make up my mind. We need to move forward, but we're not going to move forward unless we're willing to consider alternatives. Thank you.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Babiarz, 30 seconds.
An income tax is a wage on the working man. I could not even think of an income tax. I'm looking at eliminating the statewide property tax. We only raise approximately $30 million from the donor towns. We go and punish people for achieving. We punish them for having better property values. We punish people in the local communities that built up their communities so that they could have a good lower tax base. And what has the state done? It has interfered with local control and put a statewide property tax. That's why I'm going to eliminate the statewide property tax.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Benson?
My plan B and plan A is fiscal discipline. We're going to do what we need to do with the resources we are given by the people in New Hampshire and not ask for any more. What we do in the state is done by every single family that lives in this state. They live within their means. And I think it's important we set proper priorities and find more effective ways of doing things. And if we do that, we can live within our budget.
Thank you all. Now we will revisit our candidate-to-candidate question portion of the debate. Senator Fernald, you will pose the first question of both the other two candidates. Mr. Benson, you will get the first response.
Craig, my grandmother pays 12% of her income in property tax. My wife and I pay about 4%, and I bet that you pay about 1%. I don't think that's fair. We have a school funding problem. And your proposal is to rely upon a 6% increase in the statewide property tax next year, 6% the year after that. And you're going to flatline education funding for 5 years, which means as inflation and enrollment push up the costs, every penny is on the property tax. One of your campaign co-chairs said, "Don't insult my intelligence." That's how he described your education funding plan. Do you believe in fairness in the way we pay for education, and what is your way to do it fairly?
We will live within our means and be able to get things done. That's the way New Hampshire has always dealt with its problems. Enacting an income tax as a way to solve our problems just adds to the burden of the people in this state. We're going to add $800 for the average family in the state if we enact an income tax, according to the union leader. I think that's wrong. As far as your mother goes, I want to cap her property tax so she doesn't get pushed out of her home. I don't think that's fair, Mark. I happen to agree with you. But the fact of the matter is, putting an increased burden on the people of this state, especially at a time of recession, is the wrong thing to do. We cannot continue to drive people out of their homes or out of this state because they can't afford to live here. We have the lowest tax burden in the country, according to Governor Jeanne Shaheen, and she would not support an income tax either.
Mr. Benson, thank you. Mr. Babiarz, you have 1 minute to respond.
Mark, when you passed the statewide property tax, I'm sure you were thinking of your mother or grandmother. But listen, did you think about the people in the donor communities where all of a sudden the elderly had a sharp increase in their property taxes? That the local community could not change or get around that. In fact, I have a friend up in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, just a little community north of Franconia. She's being evicted because she couldn't keep up with her property tax. Her investment, she planned on local property tax and local control, and was there at the selectmen's meeting and making sure the budget stayed within intact. But because the law of unintended consequences that rushed to put a statewide property tax in, you have hurt the elderly in the donor towns. Shame on you.
Thank you. Mr. Benson, you have the next question for the other two candidates, and Mr. Babiarz, you will answer first.
John, I read your website to think of this question, and I found it interesting that you support the legalization of hemp, and Mark Fernald voted on a bill that wanted to legalize hemp as well. So I was wondering if you could discuss that with us.
Sure. Industrial hemp is a way of saving our family farms in the North Country. It's an important crop. It's good for fiber, CO2 storage, and biomass. You can even make biodiesel out of it, so we won't have dependence on foreign oil. It's a substitute for plastic and a lot of fabrics. In fact, in Canada, our NAFTA trading partner is growing industrial hemp and making a profit at it. We can have that wool industry that used to be here with new hemp-based fiber industries. I think it's time to care about the environment and have industrial hemp so that people can have ecologically sound environment using products that, again, unlike cotton, is not subsidized, can grow without fertilizer, pesticide, or weed control.
Thank you. Senator?
I voted in favor of allowing the University of New Hampshire to do some experimental growing of hemp because I think it may have some promise for New Hampshire agriculture, as Mr. Babiarz said. But I want to go back to a previous point now because I think we should talk straight here. I think we've got a very difficult issue to address, how to pay for schools. We have a state to run. We have children to educate. It costs money, and we should do it in a way that's fair. And I don't think the property tax is fair. And these two gentlemen think it is fair. I believe we should look at change. My plan doesn't raise more money for schools. It raises the same amount of money we do now, but in a fairer way. If we do what I propose, we will still be unique in this country. We will be the only state with an income tax dedicated entirely to education. Other states have shown we can do this differently. Delaware has an income tax. Their property tax burden is 1/3 of what we have here in New Hampshire. We can be frugal and we can be fair at the same time. It's great for them to say they're against the property tax, but if they don't have an alternative, it's an empty promise. They have no way to pay for it.
Mr. Babiarz, you have the next question of your two opponents, and Senator Fernald, you have first response.
Mark, you call for a 4% income tax. Do you realize that by asking for 4% income taxes, the state workers, the municipal workers, even teachers union will ask for a 6% increase to overcome the extra burden? Do you also realize that you're talking about property tax relief? That the landlord has no guarantee of refunding the difference in the property tax to the renters. So you actually put working people at a disadvantage. How do you explain that?
Well, let me explain my plan so that everybody can do the math, because it's easy to throw out a lot of scare tactics and scary scenarios, but let's just get right down to the facts. It's a 4% income tax. It's based on your adjusted gross income from your federal return, but you don't We exempt Social Security 100%. We exempt $11,000 per adult, $3,000 per kid. You only pay 4% on what's left. And you get a trade-off. Your property tax is cut in half. Now you might ask, how does that happen? We exempt homes from the statewide property tax. That's about a quarter of your bill right there that's gone. And then we increase state aid to schools. That reduces the local property tax because we don't need as much property tax to run the schools because we get more money from the state. That's another approximately 25% cut in your property tax, average of 50% cut for the typical home all over this state. For the average person, this is a great deal. Visit my website, markfernald.com, and try the tax calculator. You'll like what you see.
Mr. Benson, 1 minute.
Sounds great, doesn't it? What we need to do, though, is realize that what we have to deal with in this state is the fact that people are just going to pay more. The union leader says it's going to cost $800 a year more for the average family. But let me tell you what else. Department of Resources and Economic Development, which encourages business to start or locate here, has on their website the fact that we don't have a sales or income tax as its #1 factor for locating in New Hampshire. That means if we eliminate that many businesses will choose to start someplace else, meaning the competition for labor will decrease. What'll happen over the next 20 years, according to the Lincoln Center, is your income will decline by $123,000 cumulatively over that 20-year period of time. That's a lot of money, enough to send a child to college, pay off a home mortgage, or go to Disneyland for a really, really long period of time.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. That wraps up the candidate-to-candidate questioning. We now return to our journalist panel with Tom Fahey and a question for Mr. Babiarz.
Yes, affordable housing is frequently cited as a problem in New Hampshire now. There's no one who questions that it's becoming a crisis. It hurts business looking for workers, hurts workers looking for housing. Would you favor a state-wide building code or permitting system that would smooth the development of housing? If not, what would be your solution?
First of all, that's the problem when we have statewide anything. It adds another level of bureaucracy. In fact, in my town of Grafton, we don't even have zoning. So it allows people to build whatever they can afford. And I think that's important, that people have the option. A lot of the cost in building a home is through the regulations, increasing the cost of materials, and the permitting process. Well, in fact, I had a friend that recently built a new home in Grafton. His longest delay, which was 6 months, was because the Department of Environmental Services took so long to respond to his site survey because of possible wetlands. 6 months. So he's starting to build his home into the winter months. That is ridiculous. They should have responded within 30 days.
Mr. Benson, 30 seconds.
Part of our affordable housing problem is based on the fact that we do a long process to get people approved, as John was mentioning. I met with the Home Builders Association, and they figure it's 10 to 15% of a project to hire accountants, lawyers, engineers to go work on the permits that are necessary. In addition, there's a long holding period in some cases that adds perhaps another 10 or 15% in interest costs. It's time we streamline the process. I don't believe in the state doing that, but I do believe the state can educate local planning boards to make them more efficient.
Thank you. Senator Fernald.
We have an affordable housing crisis in this state, and here's why. Every town in the state understands that development brings family, those bring children, and children mean higher property taxes. So we've done our level best to zone against children. We've eliminated multifamily housing. We've put in bigger and bigger lot requirements. Our tax system has made children the enemy. If we want to solve the education funding crisis and solve the affordable housing crisis, we need to change this tax system that's creating these huge imbalances in our state.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Scott Spradling to Mr. Benson.
Mr. Benson, a request to hire 60 child protection workers to alleviate an already overburdened system was recently denied or at least delayed, meaning a lawsuit or at least the decision awaits the next governor. Will you support hiring these workers?
What I'd like to do is find alternative methods to allow our children to not be abused anymore. I had a press conference with Police Chief Brad Russ from Portsmouth, who's one of the foremost child advocacy issue people in the entire country. In fact, he just met with President George Bush one-on-one to discuss some of those issues. What we have in Rockingham County is a place called the Child Advocacy Center. And what that allows people to do in a multidisciplinary way is solve child abuse problems promptly, same day, and a less intrusive way by getting the county attorney, police, psychiatrists, and DCYF employees involved. It's cheaper than doing what we do now, and it's better for the children because they're not interviewed multiple times, causing them to repeat that trauma that they've already gone through. It happens to work very well, and Brad Russ, who has been in the state for a long time, has never been asked to help spread that program. I think we need to do that in the state. We've got a lot of great experts in the state that can help us do a number of things. It's time we tapped into them.
Senator.
One of the duties we have as a state is to protect our children, the most vulnerable citizens. And unfortunately, there are children who live in abusive homes or neglectful homes. And so we have an agency that's charged with carrying out our duty to the children. We've underfunded them. We had a tragedy in Rochester 2 years ago where the call went out for help for a 2-year-old girl, and it took the state 9 days to get there because they didn't have enough staff. And when they got there, she was already dead. We should be ashamed that happened in New Hampshire, and we should be ashamed the Republicans in the legislature voted to do nothing about it.
Mr. Babiarz.
I met with people from DCYF, with private contractors who provide some of the services, and they tell me the bureaucracy is chewing up too much funding. It makes handling the situations too lengthy. I believe we have to take a look at that DCYF and re-engineer it to be more efficient, to have more caseworkers, not more lawyers or bureaucracy. And I think also children are very important. And I've talked to some people that have gone through the foster care system, and they say DCYF needs to be fixed. And I intend to make that happen.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Trish Anderton to Senator Fernald.
Senator, Craig Benson has spent more than $10 million on this campaign. You've spent considerably less. Would you favor any changes to the state's campaign finance laws?
I have been a strong supporter of campaign finance reform. I believe in democracy, government of the people, not of the special interests. And so I've put in legislation to address the problems we have in our current law. One is what we call unregulated soft money. Special interests can put in unlimited amounts of money to the parties. And all of those negative ads you're seeing on TV these days are paid for by that soft money that is completely unregulated. McCain-Feingold is going to shut that down at the first of the year. But our state law has the same loophole. I put in a bill to close that loophole. Every single Republican in the state Senate voted against it. We have a problem with PAC contributions. I think that they should be regulated. They are not. Only one Republican would join me. The bill failed 12-12 on a tie vote. And we have a problem with corporate contributions in this state. We banned corporate contributions in 1911. The law was struck down in 1999. We've been working to bring that back. Again, 12 Republicans killed it in the Senate. And I would note,
Senator,
I'm the only candidate not
you.
taking corporate contributions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Babiarz, 30 seconds.
Mr. Benson can spend his own money any which way. I would like to see him spend it for private charities or a hospital wing in his name, but it's his money. As far as other contributions, I believe in full disclosure so that we know where the money's coming from. And in fact, I'm probably the poorest fundraiser here. I spent more time campaigning than fundraising, so. But I personally believe that we should not have government welfare for politicians.
Mr. Benson.
I'm pleased to have the endorsement of Senator John McCain, the father of campaign finance reform. What I will say is I've spent 19 months going around this state, meeting a ton of people and getting a lot of great ideas as to how we can make New Hampshire a better place. That's an exercise I've really enjoyed. Grassroots campaigning is the way you win New Hampshire elections, period. And I'm pleased to have met so many people who have helped me in my cause to become the next governor. And I have to say, without that, I wouldn't have all the ideas I have or the input from so many great people.
And thank you, gentlemen. We go back to our journalist panel now. Scott Sparling with another question for Mr. Babiarz.
Mr. Babiarz, UNH in-state tuition is among some of the highest prices in the nation. A recent study, in fact, says that the tuition costs there equal nearly 1/3 of a family's entire annual income. What can you do to alleviate the burden of college costs?
Well, I believe we can have a consortium of industry and business to support and enhance the education at the universities. But more importantly, I think we need to innovate. Well, in fact, I know my staff is working with Pat Cushing of Seton Hall University and talking in distance learning so that we can have specialized training, not only to be brought in through the technology of internet to the colleges, but also to our high schools, where there may not be qualified teachers in the area. I believe in innovation and competition, and that's what I'm looking for, to bring the cost down and to improve productivity.
Mr. Benson, 30 seconds.
When I ran my company, we located on the campus of UNH, hired 400 interns at one point in time who went to school full-time and were paid part-time to work for my company. It was a great program, and that needs to be expanded. I will also tell you that at Kansas State University, they have an innovative program where they ask area businesses to donate patents for them to start new businesses. They've created a number of businesses as a result of that, which has helped their endowment and helped their students understand how the real world works by creating real jobs.
Senator Fernald, 30 seconds.
Education. The money we put into education is an investment in the future. That is just as true as of higher education as it is of K through 12. We are last in state aid to education. We are missing the boat. I want to increase what we invest at UNH, but that's an empty promise unless we can solve our budgetary problems. We're facing a $100 million deficit next year because 2 taxes are being repealed, inheritance and estate. I have a plan that balances the state budget. Mr. Benson relies upon a 5% increase in revenue that's not going to be there.
Senator,
his
thank
plan
you.
is unbalanced.
Unfortunately, time is up. Back to our journalist now, Trish Anderton, with a question for Mr. Benson.
Mr. Benson, activists and some healthcare workers are pushing to hike the tobacco tax to pay for expanded healthcare programs. Where do you stand on that?
I personally don't believe that we need to hike the tobacco tax anymore. We've done it a number of different times. The money has generally ended up in places other than for the cessation of tobacco use or for the treatment of people with tobacco-related diseases. So I think continuing to raise that would just mean more money spent in other places. I also think that people that smoke have a right to smoke, and if you price it so high, they're not going to be able to do that. So I don't think we should take their liberty to choose what they want to do away either.
Senator.
I support a targeted increase in the tobacco tax for one purpose, which is to expand health care coverage in this state. We have a huge number of uninsured. I think we can build on the success of the Healthy Kids program and have a Healthy Adults program so that lower income people can get health insurance. In that way, they can become part of the system, contributors, rather than a drag on the system the way they are now. I'm the only candidate who's offering any hope to the uninsured in this state. And it's high time that we did something about this problem.
Mr. Babiarz.
I'm against increasing the tobacco tax because what happens is we had increases before that was supposed to be dedicated for smoking education, for health care, and things like that. Well, they used it for the general fund for general purposes. You just can't trust politicians with your money. A cigarette tax is a regressive tax. It's going to hurt the poor more than the wealthy. And that's why I'm against it.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Tom Fahey with a question for Senator Fernald.
Yeah, hi, Senator. The cost of child care in New Hampshire is another issue along with housing. It's hard to find, it's expensive. The number of workers who are available in the industry are underpaid and hard to find as well. What kind of steps can the state take to try to alleviate this problem?
I served for 6 years on the board of a nonprofit daycare center. I know the importance of child care for our economy, for our people, for our children, so that they are not in unhealthy child care environments where they spend all day in front of the television. So I've tried to figure out how can we expand the number of these nonprofit daycare centers that we have that are serving us so well. So I've put forward an idea, something like the L-CHIP program. It would be a matching grant program where the state would put up a certain amount of money a year, perhaps $1 million, which local people would match solely for the purpose of the capital costs of creating new nonprofit daycare centers. I've seen firsthand what happens if you can put forward those capital costs. People from the community come together. They get excited that if they can find the operating funds and make it work, that the capital will be there, because the capital is always the big stumbling block. This is a way, for very small investment by the state, we can have a huge increase in the benefit to our people.
Senator, thank you. Mr. Babiarz, you have 30 seconds.
The problem is we have government involved in this area also. They have some requirements that the small mom and pop operator cannot meet. Some requirements determined by space or how many adults to a child. Well, the parents should decide what's valid for that, not the state. Because the state has such a low ratio, it drives up the cost. Cost to retrofit a perfectly good building to some new standard that is far removed from the community. And I think that's what we have to examine, why the state is putting so much harsh requirements.
Mr. Benson, you have 30 seconds.
I want to diversify New Hampshire's economy with new industries, biotech, pharmaceuticals, financials, and high-mix manufacturers. When they come to this state, the demand for labor will go through the roof, and that'll mean those employers need to provide benefits they haven't provided in the past, like child care services. I think that's the best way to solve New Hampshire's problem, by creating great new industries in the state that'll offer leading-edge benefits to its employees.
Thank you, gentlemen. As we wind down tonight, we want to have one final question for all three candidates. Each of you will have 1 minute to respond. Senator Fernald, you will have the first response. Question from Scott Spradling.
All right. Gentlemen, a question for all three of you. Besides what you've already accomplished in life as an attorney, as a CEO of Cabletron, and as an expert in computers, setting that aside, if you could have any other job besides politics, Senator, what would it be?
I'm a country lawyer, and I love my work because I get to work with people every day. People come to me with problems, and I can be the problem solver. They don't know how to sell a house. I help them through the steps. They have problems with their tax returns. I actually take a challenge there where I often go through people's previous returns, find savings that they didn't see, amend their returns and get them refunds. I have represented people who have problems with employment issues or estate planning issues. I like being a problem solver, and I like working with people. And it has been difficult for me to give up that work for these last 4 months to campaign for governor because I miss the people that I work with. But I've had this great experience of campaigning for governor and meeting the people of New Hampshire. And I feel like it's the same kind of role because I know you've got a problem, a property tax problem, the highest property taxes in the country. And I've come up with a solution, which I'd love for you all to support in this election.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Benson, you have 1 minute.
I've been teaching at Babson College for a while now. I teach entrepreneurship. And I'll tell you, if I lose this election, I'm going to go back to teaching full-time because I really enjoy the interaction with the students and trying to capture their imaginations and mine with new ideas and new ways of doing things. It's been a great, rewarding experience. In fact, my parents are both teachers, and that's probably where I learned it. The fact of the matter is, I don't think we have enough great teachers in our learning institutions. So if we can get people from the outside to come in with different experiences, like maybe I have, I think it'll enrich our educational environment dramatically and help those students make great decisions about what they want to do in the future.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Babiarz.
I'm a veteran. I enjoyed my time in the United States Air Force for 4 years, working on the latest military equipment. Then I became an engineer, and I enjoyed that also. But I'm also especially proud of my volunteer service as a volunteer fireman and an EMT. It's through being an EMT that I realized I can help the most possible people. And because of that, if I had the opportunity, I would like to become a doctor like my brother.
Interesting to hear. Thank you, gentlemen. Believe it or not, how time flies. We are nearing the end of the hour. Each candidate will now have 1 minute for closing statements. A draw determined that Senator Fernald would go first. Senator, you have 1 minute.
We all know we have a school funding problem here in New Hampshire. I've been frustrated by the lack of progress in Concord in the 11 years since the Claremont suit was brought. So I've come up with a plan. It balances the state budget, resolves the education funding crisis, restores funding to programs, human service programs that were cut last year. It increases state aid to schools, brings kindergarten to every town in this state, cuts property taxes in half for the average homeowner, and gives the middle class a tax cut. Who could be against achieving all of those things other than Mr. Benson? The past 4 years have proven that a statewide property tax and higher business taxes are bad ideas. Mr. Benson promises 2 more years of the same because he's taken a pledge against every alternative other than higher property taxes and higher business taxes. If you like the property tax, if you think it's okay and fair, and you want to see it go up, vote for Mr. Benson. But if you're ready for a governor who will fight for property tax relief and for better schools, then join with me on November 5th. I'm asking for your vote.
And thank you, Senator Fernald. Mr. Benson, you now have 1 minute for your closing statement.
I've had a great 19 months campaigning for governor. I want to thank the people of the state of New Hampshire. We've had an education funding mess for 11 years. We've waited for the politicians to solve it, yet there's no solution done yet. How many more classes of graduating seniors do we have to see graduate before we fix this problem? I ask you to make a change and try something new. I've been so successful in this state. I've got a great family and a great business record. And the fact of the matter is that's happened because of the New Hampshire advantage. I want to preserve that New Hampshire advantage. My parents taught me when you take something to give it back, and that's exactly why I'm running for governor. To give back that New Hampshire advantage to my children, my potential grandchildren, and your grandchildren. That's what makes New Hampshire special. It's time we preserve and stand up for that right so that we can afford to pass that on to the many generations that'll come behind me. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Benson. Mr. Babiarz, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
As a veteran, firefighter, former member of a school budget committee, I understand the duty to our community. And today, I'm asking you to think about, do we want more taxes? Do we want professional politicians? Do we want the same bipartisan bickering? Or do we want a tripartisan, effectively making me referee to the two parties to restore our constitutional freedoms back to where they were? We've had this outrageous tax funding problem since we allowed the court to overstep our bounds in the Constitution. I want to work for the people, to give them education choice, to eliminate the statewide property tax, no income tax, no sales tax. I want choices in health care, choices in education, choices that come from a free, unhampered market environment. But government doesn't allow that. Lobbyists don't like that. They want to control your money every which way. The choice is yours. Stop the insanity. Let's get back to our constitutional roots. My wife, Rosalie, and myself ask you for your vote. And please visit my website, babiarz.org. Thank you, New Hampshire, for a wonderful campaign, and enjoy visiting you all throughout the state.
And with that said, we want to extend our thanks to all three candidates, Mr. Babiarz, Mr. Benson, and Senator Fernald, for participating in this debate tonight. We also want to thank our political journalists. They are Tom Fahey, the State House Bureau Chief for the Union Leader, Trish Anderton of New Hampshire Public Radio, and my colleague and WMUR-TV Political Director, Scott Spradling. Thanks for your insightful questions tonight. And of course, we extend our thanks to all of you who watched this evening. And we leave you with this reminder to tune in again tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for the next in our series of Granite State Debates 2002, the candidates for U.S. Senate. Thanks again for watching. You have a great night.
This campaign season, see more than 100 debates in key House, Senate, and governor's races live on C-SPAN.